Welcome to the Rap Soul Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of music that moves our hearts and gets our feet tapping. This is the intersection of rap and soul music from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. We appreciate you for listening. Share this podcast with a friend or family member who loves music as much as you do. The podcast is hosted by 12 Kyle. Next up, the Rap Soul Podcast.
I am your boy 12 Kyle. Man, check this out. On this episode, we're going to go back. We're going to take it back to February 4th, 1986. On that day, Janet Jackson would release her third studio album, the groundbreaking album entitled Control. Listen. If you've been following the podcast, I mentioned at the beginning of the year that I was going to do a lot of album reviews, but I wasn't going to wait until albums turned 20 or 30 or 40 years old, because you just never know what's going to happen. So I just picked a bunch of albums that I said I'm going to talk about this year, and this was top of the list. And I want to apologize to Britt, J-Boog, and Eclectic. I could have gotten all of you on this podcast, but it is 1 a.m. and I doubt very seriously that you're available to record at this time. So it's a spur of the moment thing, but I wanted to talk about this album. Control from Janet Jackson. This album probably could have been called Independence because that's what this album actually is and what it represents. Just to give you some history, as I mentioned, this was Janet's third album. A lot of people think it's her first. It's not. She had two previous albums. The first album, I think, came out in 1982, self-titled, Janet Jackson. And then the second album was Dream Street, came out in 84. Again, this is 86, so it's 2 years later. And one of the things that makes this album as special as it is that Janet did something out of the ordinary. She broke away from her father to do this album. What I mean by that is, if you know the history of the Jackson family, Janet Jackson obviously is the younger sister of the Jackson 5, Michael Jackson, the whole crew. They had their success, and a lot of their success was attributed to their father, Joe Jackson. Janet was under Joe's leadership and tutelage for her first two albums. By the time she got to the third album, she wanted to do things totally different. Joe didn't see it that way. And Janet decided that, hey, I'm going to do this my way. It's my album. And I'll be honest, if you listen to her debut album and if you listen to Dream Street, they're not bad albums, but they ain't Control. Let's keep it a bean right there. I mean, they're not Control. This album was legendary. This album was groundbreaking. This album, again, set off her independence. And it also paved the way for a lot of women in music in years to come. And I'll touch on that in just a few. But yeah, this album was incredible. It was released again, February 4th, 1986. Now, keep in mind, at the time that this album was released, Janet Jackson was 20 years old, right? So to break away from her father and his management and the handling of her career was a big risk. And, people knew Joe Jackson in the industry, and they knew his track record, and his track record, pretty much stood on its own. But you also have to keep in mind, at the time that this album comes out, Janet is an accomplished TV actress. She had been on Different Strokes, Fame, and Good Times. I saw Janet for the first time on Good Times as Penny Gordon. She later became my girlfriend on Different Strokes, Charlene Dupree. She never dated Willis. She was my girlfriend. It goes without saying that Janet was like probably my first crush. Little did I know, like Janet's 6 years older than me, almost 7 years older than, let's just say 7 years older than me. But she felt like and looked like we were the same age. So I always had a crush on Janet. I mean, like, who didn't have a crush on Janet Jackson in the 80s? If you were a young man and you didn't have a crush on Janet Jackson in the 80s, you probably didn't have a pulse, right? So that being said, she was accomplished as an actress. The music thing took a minute to take off. And what was interesting is that you have to look at her career path and you think, okay, you're going to break away from your father and his success. And she wasn't trying to detach herself from the Jackson name because she could never do that. But she wanted to do things on her own in her way. And thus the title and the movement of this album is Control. It was Control. She didn't want to play by her family rules. She actually fired her father as her manager, and she hired John McClane as her manager. Now, John McClane, not the former politician, but John McClane, the music executive, he suggested that Janet go to Minneapolis and to try to work with a couple of former Prince associates, James Harris III, aka Jimmy Jam, and Terry Lewis, formerly of The Time. Those guys had broken away from The Time because they were fired by Prince. Shout out to Prince. And so you had this combination of Janet leaving Los Angeles to go to Minneapolis. I mean, and in most folks' minds, who would leave Minneapolis to go to, who would leave LA to go to Minneapolis? But what we get is Janet and her attitude, if you will, on the album. And what you got was Janet doing an album that she actually wanted to do. I don't necessarily know that the first two albums weren't the albums that she wanted to do, but they clearly don't represent what she was trying to represent at that particular time. And, if you think back to yourself, all of us were 20 at some point. At 20, how much were you listening to your parents, right? Probably not a lot. And although she had not had the success as a recording artist, she had had success as an actress, and she knew what she wanted out of this album. And so thus she goes to Minneapolis. The intent was just to be there for a couple of weeks. She ends up spending months there to record this album. And this album is one of the best albums of the 80s. It is one of my favorite albums of any music genre. The album is a banger from front to back. Again, released February 4th, 1986. There's a lot that I can say about this album. We're going to do a deep dive. But some of the things that stand out, obviously, you got to start with the production. This album is superbly produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Again, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were in The Time, so they knew how to craft music. They knew how to craft songs. They knew how to write songs. They know how to make the production sound big. And almost every song on this album sounds big. One of the great things that I love about this album is that no two songs sound alike. But yeah, they had, the beats were like very hard edged. I always call it the Minneapolis sound because the beats have a Minneapolis sound, if you will. And they get that from their time, being residents from Minneapolis and their time with the group The Time. And then, of course, working with Prince and everything. So there's a certain sound, the percussion, piano, synthesizers, heavy on the synthesizers is this album. And this was really before technology. They were, when I speak of they, I mean Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were really ahead of the curve sonically as to how an album should sound. But, they have a little bit of funk. It's a little bit of pop. It's a little bit of R&B. And it's a little bit of what I call arena music, where it really plays well and loudly in an arena. This album is 41 minutes long, and they don't waste any time with this album. And one of the things that I love about this album is that it is a very easy listen. And when you're finished listening to this album, it really doesn't feel like it's been on for 41 minutes. The time goes by very fast. And again, I don't think they waste any tracks on this album. The album is only 9 songs long, which I think is perfect for an album. You don't have to have an album that lasts an hour, but the production is damn near perfect. It's very aggressive. It's in your face. And it fits the style that Janet wanted to portray. It fit, I think, where Janet probably was in her personality. She was no longer the little Jackson. She was no longer the, goody two shoes little girl that, we had grown to love. She was someone who was stepping out of her shadows stepping out of the shadows of her older brothers. And, what's interesting is that there's no help from any Jackson on this album, at least none that I could tell. You might have Michael on the background, but I don't think he's listed on any of the credits. Let me just double check. But no, there's no other Jacksons on this album. Just Janet, and that's it. And again, it flows very smoothly. 9 tracks, get you in and get you out. This album, in my opinion, is flawless. She released several singles from this album, and each of the singles has their own identity in Janet's ascension. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind as well is that when you talk about these singles help propel Janet to superstardom, because when this album comes out and it hits airwaves, it not only got radio play on Black radio, but it got airplay on white radio as well. It was all over MTV. Janet's videos for this music, and we'll talk about it a little later, her videos were incredible. Her videos were relatively long, but they were mini movies kind of like. And she took a page from her older brother, Michael, in that sense. And I think that's one of the things that you will always remember about this album is there were some great videos that accompany these songs. But the songs, and I'll go in order, What Have You Done For Me Lately, which was released January 13th of 1986. So it was released shortly before the album dropped. The second track that was released was Nasty. That was released April 15th, 1986. So that came out after the album came out. When I Think of You was released July 28th, 1986. Then the title track, Control, was released October 17th, 1986. The Slow It Down, Let's Wait a While ballad was released January 6th of 1987. Then the sixth song that was released was the Pleasure Principle, which was released May 12th, 1987. And the last song that was released as far as a single, so it was actually 7, not 6. Funny How Time Flies When You're Having Fun. That was released November 25th of 1987. This album had an incredible run as far as how long it was on the charts. This album dominated the charts. Janet dominated award shows. It was incredible. I mean, just to give you, not that I care about the stats, but I'm going to give you some of the stats. Billboard 200, she had 6 top 20 singles. 5 of those landed in the top 5, and 1, When I Think of You, reached number 1. The album also earned 4 Grammy nominations, including Album of the Year. It didn't win Album of the Year. That was won by Paul Simon's Graceland. But Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis did walk away with Producers of the Year, and rightfully so. But it had a slew of nominations as far as the album was concerned. Favorite Soul R&B for Nasty, Favorite Soul R&B Artist for the American Music Awards, Best Music Video for What Have You Done For Me Lately, Album of the Year for Soul Train, Best Choreography for Nasty at the MTV Music Video Awards. I mean, incredible, incredible, incredible. This album went 5 times platinum. Everybody that I knew had this album. myself included. I had the tape. And I played this tape forever and forever and forever. And then later bought the CD. And I think at one point, by the time I was in college, I bought the vinyl. I have no idea where that vinyl is, but it's probably somewhere at my mom's house, maybe. But nonetheless, I mean, the singles, the production was crazy, and the singles were just really on point. So let's get to the tracks. Track 1. She starts off the album with the title track, Control. Listen, Control, again, is her independence. It is her statement. It is her declaration, if you will, that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere, and this is who I am. I'm no longer little Penny Gordon. I'm no longer Charlene Dupree. I'm no longer Michael's little sister. I am Janet Jackson. Miss Jackson, if you nasty. But, you know, the album starts off with her talking on Control. And she says, this is a story about control and my control. After speaking those words, the music comes on and she gets busy for, the song's about 5 or 6 minutes long. I mean, like, it's crazy. And if you have time, when you finish listening to this fine podcast, head over to YouTube, pull up the Control video. I think it's like 7 minutes long. I just finished watching it again for the, 10th time today. Love watching this video. It takes me back. She was clowning around with the guys from the time. Shout out to Jerome, Jelly Bean, and of course, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. Great energy, great video to see and watch. But the song is probably about 5 or 6 minutes, and it's just, the percussion is heavy, the synthesizers are heavy. It is a funky ass song and a great lead off song. Then track number 2, Nasty. There's the definitive line of the album. Know my first name ain't baby. It's Janet, Miss Jackson, if you nasty. That's probably the most definitive or most quoted line in this entire album. Probably a close second is what she starts the album off with, what she starts the song off with, Give Me a Beat. Listen, this is like New Jack swing-ish, very funky, very heavy music. It is a jam. And what's interesting about this song is that it still knocks. I mean, like, to this day, Nasty still knocks. And you never, at least for me, I never get tired of hearing it. Then the next song, track 3, the aforementioned What Have You Done For Me Lately? Again, go watch the video. We'll talk about videos in just a second, but the video's slamming and it won several awards. But yeah, this song right here, it is really, really cool. It is like a cool song. And in this song, when I tell you, just from my memory, this song was everywhere. If you did not like Janet Jackson, there's no way you could avoid this song. This song was everywhere. It was on BET, it was on MTV, it was on radio, everywhere. And it's still my jam. I mean, like, and it's funny because, like, when you hear the song, if you were around, you remember where you were when you heard it. I'll just put it like that. Track 4, You Can Be Mine. Okay. Here's the one blemish I think that is on this album. This isn't a bad song. I don't know that I would have put this. I might have put this last if I'm gonna put it on the album. And technically, it's the last song on side 1. Shout out to side 1 and side 2, if you're from that era. But written and produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. It's not a bad song. It's not a bad song at all. It's just, it's easily my least favorite song on the album. What will surprise you is my favorite song on the album. So we get to track 5, The Pleasure Principle, written by Monty Moore, from The Time, formerly of The Time. Listen, this song right here is a banger. When people talk about this album, it is almost impossible to talk about Control without mentioning The Pleasure Principle. This joint goes hard. it is still a jam. It is still one that people still talk about to this day. It's one of the most popular songs in Janet's discography. I never get tired of listening to it. The Pleasure Principle, like she spells it out for her ex, like this is what it is. And again, I never get tired of listening to it. Then we get to track 6, When I Think of You. A very, very poppy, but very happy and feel good song. I love this song. I love this song. This was one, I think, if somebody told me, okay, I got tired of it, I could, because it was played everywhere. That being said, I never got tired of it. And I just, it's one of those joints that I love from Janet, and her energy and what she brought to the track I thought was dope. Then we get to track 7. He Doesn't Even Know I'm Alive. This is my favorite track on the album, much to surprise of many of you who were probably surprised that I said that. Yeah, this is my favorite joint. And I really can't tell you why, but this song, she speaks of being fearful about, there's a guy that she really likes and she has a crush on him, but he doesn't know her. He doesn't even know that, he doesn't know she has a crush, one, and he doesn't even know that she even exists. And she goes through these scenarios about how, she would meet him and come in contact with him and be nervous. And it's a very cute, I have puppy love type story. And I think one of the reasons why that probably resonated with me was because at the time that it came out, I was probably in that stage because I was in I had to be in middle school? I think was I middle school when I think I was in middle school when this album came out. 86. Yeah, I think I was in middle school. So I was young. So, that's the puppy love stage. That's when you first start really liking girls. So He Doesn't Even Know I'm Alive. And what was interesting was there was, if you guys are old enough to remember the dedication hour on the radio, there was, in my hometown of Florence, South Carolina, there was a song that was dedicated on the radio. And this song was dedicated on the radio. And the guy on the radio said, this is from someone special to Kyle. Wait a minute. I'm Kyle. And I don't know who it was. So it was somebody that was crushing on me that I don't know who it was. And I'm almost positive it was me because there wasn't really a lot of black Kyles around in 86. I'm going to step out on a limb and say I was the only black Kyle in my city. I think I feel pretty confident in saying that. If it was dedicated to Mike, different story. If it was dedicated to Andre, different story. But I'm pretty sure there's only one black Kyle in Florence at the time. So to this day, I don't know who dedicated that song to me. It was an admirer. So, and that's not why I love the song, but it's just a little fun fact that always kind of comes back every time I hear the song. I still wonder who dedicated that song to me. Shout out to you if you're listening, because you never said anything. Track number 8, Let's Wait a While. They slow it down with Let's Wait a While. This song is special because we get the slower, sensual side of Janet, which we did not see, at least not on this level, on the first 2 albums. I think how she's portrayed as a Jackson, as the young lady, she's, like I said, she's kind of like a goody two shoes. At least that's the way she portrayed, but she has feelings, she has emotions, she has wants, she has needs. We later came to see the sensual and sexual side of Janet, but we don't get that here. But I think this is a prelude for what we would see in the later albums from Janet, as far as her sensuality, as far as her sexuality, and how she expresses herself. I don't know what that French stuff is she's saying at the beginning of the song, but it's sexy as hell. Let's Wait a While is a jam. And this is another song that brings back memories because I do remember having, an ex-girlfriend break up with me playing this song in the background. I don't know why she decided to play it, but she was talking to me we need to break up. We need time apart. And then I hear her hit the rewind button. And then I'm like, what is she doing? But I'm sitting there listening. We're breaking up. What can I say? But that was always funny to me. But this is a really, really dope song. Still love it. It's like I said, it introduced a different side to me of Janet. And then the album ends with track 9. Funny how time flies when you're having fun. Another slow joint, another kind of sensual, Janet slowing it down. She hit you with the headbangers early in the album. She closes out the album on two slow jams. This is dope. This is dope. It is a dope song. And like I said, she does a great job of taking you through the highs and lows of this album from front to back. I can't state it enough how much I love this album. I mentioned earlier the videos. Janet dropped, now keep in mind, there are 9 songs on this album. There were 6 videos for this album. That is unheard of. You normally don't get out 6 or 7 singles off of an album. There were 7 singles that were released, and there were 6 videos that were released for this particular album. There are videos for Control, Nasty, What Have You Done For Me Lately, of course, The Pleasure Principle, When I Think of You, and Let's Wait a While. The Pleasure Principle video hit a lot of dudes in the chest, because here's the thing. In the other videos, we see Janet, she's choreographing, it's dancing, it's everything. And that's what we get in this video. But in this video, in the other videos, Janet, she's in a jacket and she's got padded shoulder pads and, she's propped up and everything and she's fly. But in that Pleasure Principle video, black t-shirt, black jeans, knee pads. Listen, man. It was dudes like, wait a minute, because now we get a chance to see Janet's body. And for a young boy, listen, that was everything. That was everything. And so her doing the flips and jumping on the chair, it was different. And so there's not anybody that doesn't remember the Pleasure Principle video. I watched it before I recorded this episode and I was just like, whoa, it still puts a smile on my face. And it's so many years later. But great video. I mean, her choreography was great. And it's funny going back watching the videos because there was a familiar face, one of Paula Abdul, who was a famous choreographer before she became a singer, actress, entertainer, if you will. So Paula's in the videos because she's doing the choreography for the videos behind the scenes. Let's Wait a While video is dope, dope, dope. The video stars Janet and what's the guy's name? Ty-Mac. He was in The Last Dragon. It's interesting because, in the song she's talking about wait a while before we take our relationship to the next level, sensual. So in the video, they're sitting on the couch and Ty-Mac slides his hand on her knee and he goes to try to kiss her and she pulls away. And she's like, nah, play. I mean, she gives a look like, no, we can't do this right now. And so he's disappointed. He gets mad. He leaves the house. And it was interesting because that's where she was at that stage in her life, or at least that's what she wanted to portray. And I think that's good. And I thought that was good for us to see because in the song, the video correlates with the song. Let's wait a while, And she says at the end of the song, I promise I'll be worth the wait. And she tells that to him and he gives her a big hug and all as well. But those videos were smokers. All of the videos, Control is, like I said at the beginning, that video is 7 minutes long and it is worth every 7. It is a jam. And I love, even in the Control video, she starts off, she's going to the sound check and her mother in the video is her same mother that was her mother in Good Times, Janet Dubois, the late Janet Dubois, aka Willona Woods, and her dad. I guess he's supposed to be Joe Jackson. He didn't want her to get an apartment. He wanted her to live at home, and it's about her controlling. And the guys from the Time come up and they're clowning her and everything like that, and then they go to the show and they turn it out. It is a dope video. Do yourself a favor, go check it out after you finish watching this and listening to this episode. But the videos are incredible. This album, I mentioned earlier, like you cannot understate how important it was. And the reason why I say it was important is because Janet set the bar for what was to come years later for big female pop stars and just female stars in the music industry. If there was no Janet Jackson and if there was no Control, there would be no Whitney Houston. Now, keep in mind, Whitney was already out, but Whitney wasn't on that level as far as like taking over her career. Whitney's, particularly her earlier part of her career, was really controlled by the powers that be. I think her father controlled her career, and kind of molded her, told her what to do. Her parents, let's just say her parents. But yeah, if there was no Control album, subsequently years later, you don't get Mariah, you don't get Aaliyah, you don't get Beyonce, and people may bristle at the idea of Janet Jackson and Beyonce, but the reality is, if there is no Control album, there's never a Renaissance album. That's just facts. And that's not to compare the two, but Janet's independence on this album paved the way for other women to be independent subsequently years later, because being independent and having your own thoughts and ideas as to how you want your album to sound and how to look and how you want to express yourself on record, that was unheard of. You pretty much did what the record label wanted you to do. And so Janet's independence on this album really paved the way for Beyonce. And I think that shouldn't be lost on fans. Again, it's not to compare the two because they're in two different eras. But yeah, if you don't have a Janet Jackson and if you don't have Control specifically, then a lot of things don't happen in the music industry. And I think Janet opened a lot of doors. And she doesn't get credit for it. And to be honest, she's not really the type to look for the credit. But I just think like if she doesn't do that, then these certain things don't happen down the road. Maybe somebody else opens those doors. I don't know. But Janet kicked the door down. The idea of a woman saying, hey, I want my video to look like this. I want my sound to look like this. I want my producers to look like this. I want this album to look and flow like this. And this is the way that we're going to do it. That was unheard of. Now, although this album is perfectly crafted by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, this is Janet's vision, her vision along with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And they got no outside influences. This was their baby. And so the songs on Control are very special. Again, it is a must listen. In conclusion, I would suggest that you all, if you haven't done so already, if you haven't done it in a while, go back and listen to this album. This album bangs from front to back, from Control to Funny How Time Flies When You're Having Fun. Again, Janet stepped out of the shadows. She was no longer Michael's little sister. And it's funny because even in watching some of the videos and with Michael being gone, I could see Michael in her face, like, because they look alike, obviously, because they have the same parents. But I think Janet really set the bar on this album. And by putting her flag down, she stated her claim as one of the best in the business. And she still is to this day. Now, where you want to rank Janet as far as singers and, entertainers, I'm not going to argue wherever you decide to put her. For me, this album is at the top. And it's still going to stay there for years to come because I think this album and Janet Jackson specifically opened the door for a lot of people. And I think everybody should kind of tip their hat to Janet because she made it happen. And we should be thankful. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching first and foremost. Also, subscribe, and then share with your friends. Hit the notification button. That way you get notifications when we drop episodes because the YouTube links actually come out before the actual podcast does. The great thing about YouTube is that we have not only both the visual, but we also have audio as well. So if you want to listen or watch it, you can do it on YouTube. And leave comments. We love comments. Hit us up on, I know you can leave comments on Spotify. You can also leave comments, obviously, on YouTube. Wherever you're listening to the podcast, you should be able to leave a comment or review. Again, that's going to do it for me. I am your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5 G's. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. This concludes the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Rap Soul podcast. You can find the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Follow the podcast on social media. And feel free to continue this discussion on our Reddit page. More importantly, share this podcast with a friend or family member who loves music as much as you do. Until next time, 5,000.